Hello, cosmic beings out there. I'm Mannah, a therapeutic astrologer and interviewer. I'm passionate about learning and sharing insights on how to live a better life. I hope you'll stick around as I infiltrate the minds of thought leaders, authors, and healers from around the globe. Wherever you find yourself right now, dear listener, I want you to remember that you have a place to call whole. Now please enjoy this episode. Welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled today to be able to speak with Phil Mollon. First of all, welcome Phil.
Thank you, man.
I'll introduce you a little bit and what we're talking about today. So you have done a lot of work in clinical practice. It says online that it's 45 years of clinical practice. And you've had this journey from psychoanalysis to now energy psychology. And we'll be curious to hear about that. And mostly, I think we will be speaking about your newest book, but I know there's even more coming. You are a prolific writer, if I may say so. But your newest book is called Blue Diamond Healing: Exploring Transpersonal and Transdimensional Aspects of Energy Psychotherapy. And I found a little introduction of it that I'm just going to read aloud. It says, in Blue Diamond Healing, Mollon provides a hypothetical map of dimensional levels and structures, combining psychology, physics, metaphysics, cosmology, and spirituality, all in one far-reaching framework. I felt that is, from what I've read of your book, that's quite a match, and I'm really excited to be able to speak with you about it because I have read it. I haven't fully comprehended it, and I've read some of the chapters several times, and of course also been very curious about the actual healing method with the Blue Diamond. So I'm really happy that you're here and we'll open this topic up. So how does that sound to you?
That sounds good, man. And I will also draw upon some of the ideas in my forthcoming book, The Physics of the Mind, which should be published sometime this year by Karnak. And that's based on looking at the mind in terms of relatively conventional physics, including, of course, quantum physics and relativity, and also the ideas of Richard Amoroso that our matter universe here is subtended within a number of other dimensional realms, all coming from a source that is called the unified field.
Wonderful.
So it's a very exciting perspective, I find, that from relatively conventional physics that actually is very congruent with the more esoteric metaphysics of the Blue Diamond book.
Right. Yeah, and I can imagine that you've written this and now you are just finishing this other work, and so you see how it's all interlinked, and this might be even more in the foreground for you. So I'll look forward to reading that as well. I wanted to ask you about, firstly, your journey with this, because as I look just the titles of your book, but I've also read some of your other books, one on, is it narcissism or psychopathology or something, and you have also one where you talk about the new trauma paradigm. It's really it's just down my alley, it's what I care about too. But so it seems, is it true that you've kind of taken a leap there? Because did your books change over time? I'm sure they did, but from, I guess, therapy and psychopathology into more to do with energy? How would you see it?
Yeah, that has been an evolution in in my interests and ideas and what I've written about. But I see it as a continuity. There's no abrupt break or shift. It's just that I've perhaps incorporated more dimensions, if you like, into how I approach clinical work. So shall I tell you a bit about my professional journey and how I arrived at...
I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear it. Yes, please.
Okay, so way back in the beginning, I trained in clinical psychology. So I qualified in clinical psychology, and I began to work in British National Health Service, mental health services. And then I also trained in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and also I trained as a psychoanalyst. But there came a point when I was working in a general psychiatric setting, seeing some very disturbed patients. And I found that although I considered myself very well trained in conventional forms of psychotherapy, and that this was quite effective for patients who were not so traumatized and not so disturbed, that when I tried to work in this way with these more troubled patients, it was quite literally worse than useless. It made people worse. So this was gentle, empathic talking therapy. Made people worse when they'd suffered a lot of trauma, because they would start to tell me about terrible things they'd experienced, but it would not lead them to feel better. It would lead them to feel worse. Also, I began to realize a point that is now well recognized and obvious, but it was not so obvious at the time. It was not part of the conventional clinical wisdom, that many kinds of mental health and indeed physical health problems have a trauma basis. Trauma of one kind or another, adverse childhood experiences, are at the root of many people's problems. And the kind of patients I was seeing at that point had suffered extensive childhood trauma and also trauma as adults. Their life just had been filled with trauma. And so this set me off on a search for better ways of helping people, because it seemed such a terrible dilemma that here were people most in need of psychotherapeutic help, and yet a very gentle, empathic talk therapy consultation would make them worse. I mean, what a terrible clinical dilemma. So that sent me exploring and searching and questioning and wondering. And that process continues. It doesn't stop. I've never arrived at some point and thought, well, this is it. And the first effective treatment for trauma I found was EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which was coming into professional awareness as we got into the 1990s. And I had a colleague who had learnt to use it, and every day he was telling me about his extraordinary results using this. And so then I trained in it myself, found it very helpful for many patients became quite fluent in its use. And then, and also, I would say that the content of what we would be dealing with, what would emerge, would often be very psychoanalytic, in the sense that it could be used in a way that facilitated free association, and we were always getting to key formative traumatic experiences. The problem is that EMDR itself can be quite hazardous if not used carefully. Now, skilled practitioners learn ways of using it in ways that minimize the hazard, but nevertheless, it is hazardous because it can open the floodgates of trauma, and one traumatic memory leads to another, and the sort of avalanche effect, the dam bursts and the person is overwhelmed, and that's not a good state to be in. Now, from EMDR practitioners, I began to hear of some who were using some of these energy acupoint tapping methods, particularly EFT, emotional freedom techniques. This was coming from America, because the early adopters in America of EMDR had also become early adopters of methods such as EFT. And EFT would map very easily onto an EMDR kind of format, just replacing tapping on acupoints with the eye movements or the bilateral tapping of EMDR. And the advantage was not only that these acupoint tapping methods were very effective, but also they were much more gentle and safer. And so I began to use EFT a lot. Now then, I gradually became aware that this was just part of a much broader family of energy psychology approaches, generically called energy psychology, a term that was first coined by psychologist Fred Gallo in his 99 book of that title. So I began attending conferences of this wonderful Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, and learning about all these wonderful methods. And eventually I served as a president of ASEP, which was a great privilege. So it meant that I learned a great deal about these energy methods.
Yeah, and you went full on with it. I don't mean to interrupt. Just have a question before moving on, because this is, yeah, it seems like this was really your path in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it true that because you have a book on EMDR and EFT, was that the first? Did you realize then that it's part of a broader family called energy psychology, or how was the journey from?
Yes, that was just on the cusp of my awareness of the broader field. I'd been asked to write a book on EMDR, but by the time I was fully immersed in writing it, I'd began using energy methods a great deal, and so its title and its focus shifted to EMDR and also the energy therapies.
Okay, right about that.
Yeah, but what I'd like to emphasize is that that did not mean that I jettisoned all my psychoanalytic understanding. That was always remained. It's just it becomes.
That's what you do in the book as well, where you kind of see it in what you related to what Freud is saying. So that's pretty cool that you actually base it on, look, he's saying this, and that's similar to what we're doing here in energy psychology. As far as I remember, that's you do that, right? You quote Freud within that framework. I like that because it's sometimes we are doing the same things, but we're calling it something different. And so even though it's a completely different tradition, he's like paved the way even for some of this to come up. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, yes, I do. Although the work I do these days would not look like psychoanalysis, it remains informed by psychoanalysis, and I feel it's very much of it is congruent with Freud's original approach, not necessarily that of other psychoanalysts, but Freud. And Freud's descriptions of libido are very similar to accounts of subtle energy. That it's a life force. It can flow or it can be blocked, and it has many qualities very similar to descriptions of subtle energy. And the point of that is that in the energy therapies, we are working with the body's subtle energy, which is like at the interface between the mind and the body. So we're working with the mind in both its conscious and unconscious aspects, and the body and the subtle energy system. And it's like the energy system is where the information is stored. It's deeper than the mind. And if we are working at that subtle energy level, we can get shifts and changes and effects much more easily, because we are working at a deeper level or a higher level, depending on how you think of it. By contrast, in conventional work, if we are trying to help modify a person's thoughts and feelings by talking with the person about their thoughts and feelings, we are working at the same level as the problem is manifest. But if we can get either underneath it or above the problem to where it's encoded, then we can have much more of an effect, much more easily. And things shift in the psyche quickly and easily, providing there is nothing blocking that. And there usually are things in the mind, the deeper mind, blocking the progress. And these are called the psychological reversals, the internal objections, the sabotage patterns that mean that the person consciously desires a particular goal or wants to be free of a particular problem, but something is saying no. And we can use simple energy testing to quite precisely locate what these internal objections are. And they're usually either a small number of things. It's either felt to be not safe to resolve the problem, or I don't deserve to resolve the problem, or I won't be me. It will violate my identity if I resolve this problem. And once we've identified the reversals in the person's system, the objections, then we address those by talking about them and tapping on relevant acupoints. It all starts to shift. And then when they are out of the way, the target problem starts to shift very easily.
Mm.
So it becomes a very precise way of working.
It makes a lot of sense in thinking that we should be on our own team, like what we want to do, that we don't go in different directions inside ourselves, but kind of say yes to this is what we want to do. And if there's then parts of us who resist, who's uncomfortable or unsafe in what the dominant part of us has agreed to, then that can create, that we're not going to succeed in what we set out to do.
Yes, it brings more congruence and coherence into a person's goals and strivings. Because as we know, if there is an unconscious objection saying no, the unconscious will always win. So that these are the sabotage patterns that we need to identify.
Yeah. Okay, Phil. So did I, because I had a little interruption in your story about your journey. Did we go through that bit? Because I don't want to miss anything.
Okay, so as I was realizing that these energy methods all work so wonderfully, there were lots of these approaches, and they get called different things, different brand names. They come from, a lot of them, from an American commercial culture where people are always trying to create their particular brand or patent or copyright or whatever, but they tend to be all variations on a number of different themes, and they all work. They all work very well, and they all involve somehow activating the subtle energy system, and then using words and the mind to tune into problematic areas and dissipate them. In terms of my forthcoming book, I would describe it as creating necessary entropy in the patterns that are too ordered in the mind. Many mental health problems are to do with patterns in the mind being too ordered, too rigid, too fixed. The mind and the brain just keep looping around the same area. And we need to introduce more entropy, disorder, to allow it to dissipate, to randomize, so that a more constructive organization can then organically emerge. And this is probably why psychedelic therapies work. I have reservations about the safety of psychedelic methods, but when they do work, I think it's because they introduce some optimum entropy into a psyche that is pathologically too organized, allow something new to emerge. But to complete the story, so I began to realize that there must be even more to explore, even better ways of working. These are the dimensions that we're tapping into. And by the way, it's a common observation that when people start using energy methods, it seems to function as a stepping stone towards some kind of more spiritual awareness. People just seem inevitably to move along that path, even if they are not heading on that path initially. So the sense of something more, the sense that there can be even better, more helpful ways of working, this became a a strong, persisting feeling, intuition. So around then, mid to late 2000s, I was thinking a lot about these things, and I came across a body of work, and there are others too, who have presented the idea of 12-point grids that, if we draw them, they'd look a little bit like a traditional Kabbalah tree of life, but more symmetrical with 12 points. And they would fit together perfectly in a matrix in every direction. And the idea that these 12-point grids are like basic fractals, from the tiniest to the most huge, and that our world, and indeed our every dimension of our being, are patterned on these 12-point grids, which are like 12 dimensions. And I became intrigued by the point that there's a center of this grid, and I call it the blue diamond. Now, before I had much coherent awareness of this at all, really, I found myself often somehow guiding my clients when we were working with acupoints and chakras and so forth, often to put fingers on this blue diamond point, which is just under the collarbone. It's just underneath where a man's tie knot might be, right in the center. And I didn't really know why I kept guiding people to, but it just seemed an important and helpful place.
It is also close to the heart chakra, right?
It is. And it's
intuitive, like the heart is.
Exactly. And sometimes that place is called the high heart chakra.
Right. High heart. The higher version of it.
Yeah. And I gradually came to recognize that this blue diamond point, it's the center of these grids, is like a direct access point to the source of everything, or in terms of more conventional physics, the unified field that some people speak of, that feeds down all our dimensions into where we are now in this matter-based realm. And there are quite a number of energy psychology approaches that have made increasing use of coherent words and intentions. This has been a feature of the development of energy psychology, that it started with a lot of focus on physical tapping on acupoints. But gradually, there's been a shift towards just the more coherent use of words of intention. Coherent use of words and intention. And these have an effect, particularly if the client is helped into a slightly meditative state. And the blue diamond field particularly seems very responsive to whatever we wish to ask for or intend or command. Providing any internal objections have been addressed, the blue diamond field will bring about what we ask. in one way or another.
This is so interesting. I really hope people are getting this. It's a direct access point we're talking about. We can sort of locate it physically, and it's a grid, and it's really where things can shift in a big way. So you can imagine by reading your book that I've been trying to do this. You have a simple one at first in your book, and then you have more advanced one. I couldn't deal with those, but even the simple one is still something that maybe we can. I don't know if we go into that now or later, but just like, I think this is a curiosity people will have when they hear it. Like, okay, how do I do that, right? But of course, we also want to talk about the philosophy of it to really get it, and also maybe to see if people know it from somewhere else, because this is how it is with ideas, and like we pick up different pieces of it. And now was it you who discovered this, or did you find it in the energy psychology world? How did it come about?
Well, it's often difficult to pinpoint exactly when a certain idea emerges. So the idea of the grids was coming from a body of complex material I was studying at the time that had been published by something called the Azurite Press, which no longer exists. But the use of the blue diamond and the sense of it being blue, and thinking of it as a blue diamond and calling it a blue diamond, I've no idea quite how that arose. If I look back over the development of how I've been using it seems rather dreamlike, really. That I felt guided to in a lot of these procedures. They would often come to me in the moment of working with a client. That's how a lot of it would develop, rather than something I thought about outside of the session. And of course, I would always be guided by the feedback, the responses from the client. And we can certainly do a little demonstration for people.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Yeah, just a simple version.
Well, it will be whatever it is, because the thing about blue diamond work is that it's always different. And so a lot of colleagues have learned to use the blue diamond in one way or another. And what is very striking is that each person will use it in slightly different ways. It's as though the blue diamond field, it's a field of infinite intelligence, and it will guide and teach each person, whether they be a client or practitioner, to use it in ways that are right for them.
So you said it's a field of infinite
intelligence, yeah.
Intelligence.
Because I think it does link to the unified field.
Yeah. And so we have to kind of imagine being inside of the blue diamond.
Yes, yes.
And then placing our concerns in it.
Exactly, yes.
It's about as far. No, there's also something about into the ground and up to the sky, but maybe you should detail how to envision this for people out there.
Yes, well, it is essentially as you described. So I ask people to put their hands up, 2 fingers of one hand on the blue diamond point, and then the other hand on the heart chakra underneath. The other hand can go on other chakras as well, but I like to use the heart chakra. And so typically I use the blue diamond towards the end of a session with a client. So the session up to that point would have involved talking through whatever the issue is in a fairly normal way. The client would be talking, I'd be listening, not saying very much, for maybe half an hour or so. And then we go into exploring it a bit more at the energetic level, looking for the psychological reversals and so on, and the key formative experiences that have contributed to the problem. And we'd be addressing those, talking, acupoint tapping, maybe working with the chakras. And then when a lot of that basic work has been done, we go into the blue diamond to request healing at a deeper and more comprehensive level, because the blue diamond can take things much further than we can with our ordinary human minds.
That's why it's so exciting. That's why I like, yes, finally help me. But then does it, so we're talking about 2 fingers at the heart point, but you say it's where a tie can be knotted, but is that exactly, because I'm not exactly sure what that would be, where would I tie it?
You don't have to worry about being too precise. So just know that it's just underneath the collarbones, right in the center.
Right. Got it.
And so shall we do that now?
Yes.
Okay.
Instead of Freud.
Okay. So anyone watching or listening, I invite you to focus on this blue diamond point with a couple of fingers there, however the blue diamond appears to you, and the other hand on your heart chakra. So it may appear deeply blue, bluer than the bluest blue, crystalline, shimmering with silver rainbow frequencies and a pure silver white core. And so anything that is troubling you, just bring it into the blue diamond field. And perhaps I should say that if you're following this exercise, and if anything disturbs you about it, or you experiencing anything unpleasant or alarming, then just gently desist. Stop doing it. But if you're comfortable with it, just think of your consciousness entering that blue diamond portal to your own higher healing realms. Now, you're not leaving your body, you're just entering into a deeper field of your own being, connecting to your own higher realms and beyond that. Think of how you are connecting also to the unified field, the source. And so we bring all that is troubling you into the blue diamond field for healing, guidance, and resolution in whatever is the optimum way. The guidance and resolution may not be quite what or how you expect. It may be guiding you to certain actions or further inquiries that are helpful to you, but there will be guidance. Then we're placing all of the concerns deeply into the blue diamond, into the realm of the unknown and unknowable. then, with an exhalation of the breath, send a copy of the blue diamond straight up into the far distance above with a pfft, where it forms a shimmering, clockwise spinning sphere, moon-like sphere, plasma-like, of silvery rainbow energy. It's spinning clockwise. And it's showering clockwise spirals of silver rainbow energy down around you, clockwise, winding around you, clockwise, and down into the earth, clockwise. As you see it spiraling down clockwise into the earth, that's the direction it's going, clockwise. Silver rainbow energy. Now, with another exhalation of the breath, send another copy of the blue diamond down into the core of the earth. Where it activates the vast counterclockwise swirling vortex. Coming up and around you counterclockwise, drawing it out all of the waste, all that is toxic, all that is false, distorted, degraded, corrupted, deceptive, or dysfunctional. It's true counter-rotating spinning fields, spinning through each other. Breathing in the clockwise, fresh, clean energy and information. And breathing out down the counterclockwise spiral, higher dimensional breathing. The basic functions of life. Breathing in the fresh energy and information, breathing out the waste. And as the two spinning fields are spinning through each other around you, they create a sphere of intense, higher dimensional light around you. Pulsing the beat frequency of the unified field, the precise healing frequencies into every cell of your being. And now smoothing out the field of your mind, the landscape of your mind, smoothing out the field of your mind and dissolving any black holes in the mind, dissolving any concentrations of negative thoughts, emotions, traumas, dissolving, randomizing them. Areas of trauma and dysfunctional patterns. Desynchronizing, becoming complete entropy, losing all informational structure. And then with another out breath, we can expel the entropy. And the counterclockwise spiral, and also out, randomizing it to the edge of the cosmos. Whilst the fresh, clean, clockwise energy re-informs your system at every dimensional level. When you're ready, just gently bring your awareness back.
Oh man, So, Phil, what is it reinforming my system about? Because in this last part, you're talking about then the clockwise spiral is reinforming.
Reinforming your system with fresh energy and information from the unified field that is more helpful and organic to your system, restoring your true organic living template.
Right. Okay. So actually, we don't need a whole lot of words or intentions for that part, but just a trust in the natural organic field.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Because it's recognizing that there are limits to our human knowledge, skills, and wisdom. And so we are, in a sense, handing it over to higher dimensional wisdom to do the tasks that we are unable to do in our own human minds.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Are you exhausted? Do I get a few more questions?
Yeah, there is one thing I'd like to add into that, which was the point about how negative thoughts and emotions and traumatic memories tend to cluster together. And in some of the more esoteric realms of conventional physics, I'm thinking particularly of the work of William Tiller, physicist, and his work with intention and demonstrating the effects of intention in meditative states and how that intention can affect physical reality and subtly alter the laws of physics, in fact, in his very careful research over many years. But also the way his ideas have been developed by computer scientist Doug Matsky, looking at the ways in which patterns of thought, when they are represented mathematically in a matrix, they tend to similar elements cluster together. And these seem to form quasi-gravitational masses in mind space. So there's external matter-based space and black holes in the cosmos, but there's also mind space that operates in quite an analogous way. And you get sort of thought, emotion, memory masses in the psyche that similarly have a gravitational attraction. They draw more of the same, and they distort mind space in a manner closely analogous to the way that dense concentrations of matter and black holes distort space and time in the cosmos. There's a very similar thing happens in the mind, which is why when people have experienced bad things, they tend to attract more of the same. And it's not that the person is motivated to attract more of the same. They're not trying to do it either consciously or unconsciously. It's just that it's there patterned in the mind space and their energy system. And it attracts more of the same because we are not, our minds, bodies are not confined within these matter forms. They connect outwardly into the wider energy and informational field. Our minds certainly are not separate. We are constantly communicating and interacting with other minds and with the global mind of the cosmos itself. And that's why it's important to dissolve these quasi-gravitational masses in the psyche.
Which would be negative thoughts. How can I translate that?
Negative thoughts, emotions, and memories. They cluster together and attract more of the same. And that's also why in psychotherapy, it's important to have a balance between attention to the traumatic past, but also focusing on goals for a more positive future. If you focus too much on the traumatic past, it will tend to be counterproductive, and it will just entrench the person more and more in that world of trauma.
So in psychotherapy, you would talk about dual awareness.
Yes.
Having one foot in what we're dealing with for a target point, and then also, where I have resources.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And where we want to go in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. So there's a little for you there. Big stuff. And I'm just going to read a little bit from some of my questions I had before. I know we won't do all of that, but see, you have something called the unknown evolving self. And
Yes.
yeah, maybe that actually, the unknown evolving self.
Yeah, thank you. That's the point I think is very important. So there's been a long tradition of psychoanalytic writings about false self kind of ideas. And there's a very important literature on the false self, and Winnicott's writings on the false self, and others. And also in the field of narcissism, where people are preoccupied with a particular image of the self, often a grandiose image that they are striving to protect. But it can be any image, because people can have a very negative image of the self, and they will strive to protect that as well, because whatever image they have of the self, people always will tend to try to protect and preserve it, because that's like preserving order in the system. And letting go of that can feel frightening, opening up to the unknown. So people tend to have an image, a set of ideas about who and what they are, and they tend to hang on to them, and they are really like delusions. They certainly they are illusions. They are part of the ego story, and the ego's stories are all, in a sense, lies. They're all stories we create and then tend to believe in. And by the way, I found many years ago that it's better not to have beliefs of any kind, but just working hypotheses that can be modified in the light of emerging evidence and information. So I'm not too attached to any ideas that I'm talking about. They could all be discarded or revised, and
I love that. Yeah.
And I might be talking nonsense.
But it's the same. It's in that spirit of the evolving self. So
yes. So the point about the unknown self is that you can't really point to a true self. You can say, well, that's a false self. That's a false, grandiose self. But you can't then say, well, yeah, but that's a true self. Because as soon as you try to point to the true self, or like take a photograph of it or an image, or say what it is, you've kind of fixed it and it's no longer alive and true and growing. So the point I'm making is that the true self, I have to put that term in inverted commas, that the true self is always an unknown, evolving self. And that's what we want to allow. And it's important in working with clients, patients, in any form of psychotherapy, I think, not to assume that we know or understand anything about them. To take the stance that I'm essentially ignorant, but if I am patient and sincere and trustworthy, this unknown evolving self, this other unknown being, will or may reveal something of who they are. And so I would say it's always a sacred, unknown, evolving self.
Sacred. Yeah. Yeah. So that goes for both the therapist and the client.
Yes. Yes. And yes, and the client's true self is always a sacred, unknown, evolving self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that agenda-free approach. I'm not having the answers here. And then I really also like the releasing some restraint I feel when you talk about that you don't even like saying beliefs, because whatever you stand for, it can be revised.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very liberating. And because then it also goes, I could have a question before, like, yeah, but we need to identify with something. We need to feel like we're someone, right? But actually what you're saying is kind of answering that is, yeah, you are someone, but it's not any fixed thing. And
Yes.
it can continue to be open.
Yes. Yes.
So I realize I've gone a little dark. I'm just going to turn on the light a little bit here. Hope you didn't know. Did you notice at all?
Yeah, that's
Getting dimmer and dimmer here. But it actually reminds me of something you say about transference. I'm not sure in which one of your books, but like maybe having placed too much emphasis on that. I don't know, is that something you would like to comment on, or is that a little bit outside?
yes, yes. I will comment on that. I think Freud's original account of transference was very important and accurate. That sometimes a client, a patient, as a form of remembering, will have thoughts and feelings and attitudes and perceptions in relation to the therapist, and it is a form of remembering. And Freud actually called it, and this is in quite a late work he wrote, might even have been in the last book he wrote, if I remember rightly, that transference is a menacing illusion, and that the patient needs to be helped out of that menacing illusion as quickly as possible. And I think that's right. We don't want to, well, in my perception, we don't want to encourage transference because it is an illusion, a misperception. And what tended to happen over the years in all kinds of different forms of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in different parts of the world is that there came to be an increasing emphasis upon the relationship between client and therapist. Sometimes it's talked about in terms of transference, sometimes it's talked about in terms of the attachment relationship
and resonance, and it's a great deal. I'm a newer therapy student, and it's definitely a big deal. So I'm very curious what you have to say about it, because it's interesting that a lot can come from it in a way. Like if I dare to say how I feel in this relationship, then that can shed light on maybe all of my relationships. But then, for example, in IFS, that after I've met you and Ruthie Smith, I definitely consider that to be an energy psychology. In that, you would actually have the attachment relationship healed with yourself in a way, so less about the therapist then.
Yes. So although these things are important, I don't doubt that they are important, but it can be a problem when it is believed that the only healing vehicle, the only process of healing, is through that reparative relationship with the therapist. So with energy psychology methods, it doesn't have to all be played out in the theatre of the transference, in the theatre of the relationship with the therapist. The focus remains on what's inside the person and accessing their own higher healing resources to bring about changes and healing within them. So it's not played out in the transference. It's an internal process. And although now and again we would get issues that come out that are transference in some form, and then they need to be addressed and understood and where they come from and so on, that's not the main focus of the work.
Mm-hmm. So in a way you could say it's even more about agency, like that, like
yes,
you can do something about your own situation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I know we are we are running short on time here, and I want to respect that. I want to make it not as long as my last interview, but it's hard because you've written so much, and there's so much in just this book, The Blue Diamond Healing. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know if we could just have a little bit about intrusions and implicate order, because this is, I think it's similar to, again, one branch of IFS that is Bob Faulkner, who also talks about, something outside of this world can, like demons or possessions, call it, again, different words for it, but that something can come in and really disturb our system, that needs to, of course, be sent away again. You can't heal it in ordinary therapy. Can you talk about what you mean with intrusions and implicate order?
Okay. Well, I don't want to go into too much detail about that. It's
Why not? Is it too scary?
I will say something about it, but it is a complex and potentially disturbing area. But the point is, as I see it, that there are these many other dimensions and realms, and just as there are physical pathogens and parasites of various kinds in our matter realm, similarly, there can be analogous pathogens and parasites at other dimensional levels, energy parasites, if you like, and these can attach to people, and they will tend to feed off the negative energies. So they tend to feed off trauma and fear and suffering and and pain. And sometimes it can be quite important to request that they be removed, and we can do that in the Blue Diamond. But it's a complex and subtle business, and not to be entered into in a cavalier way.
Okay, so it's sensitive. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, but you do that quite a bit in the book, actually. Right, and is it similar to what you called errant code?
Errant coding. No, the idea of the errant coding is that there can be. Let me backtrack a moment. So, one of the very first energy psychologists, and the first to make use of acupoint tapping was Roger Callahan, who was a clinical psychologist who began exploring acupoint tapping methods as early as 1979, and he'd been learning with the group around the chiropractor George Goodhart and the psychiatrist John Diamond. Now, one thing that Callahan used to emphasize is that it's not like a plumbing problem. Energy stuck and you need to tap these points to release it. It's not quite like that. He emphasized that it is information patterned in the subtle energy system, and the patterning takes the form of the sequence of acupoints that you need to tap on, which you can discern by simple energy testing, muscle tone feedback methods that he developed. But it was information, and that was his emphasis. And so it began to occur to me that if we postulate these 12-point grids, there can be information patterned at that much deeper level. So deeper than the acupoint meridian system, deeper than the chakras, in these 12-point grids. And I found that the different points of the 12 points of the grid seem to have different sort of emotional, psychological significances, like point 1, very much to do with grounding in the earth and material, grounding in the material realm, security in the material realm.
Like
and
the root chakra. Are we talking about the root chakra then?
Well, it's a bit like the root chakra, but it's in the grid, which is in a deeper form. And then signet number 2 would be to do with nurturance from an other, the paradigmatic context being nurturing from the mother's breast. And so these different points would have all these different meanings. And I found, or as it seemed to me, there can be errant coding in the grids, a very deep level. It's below the mind. And often it can seem important or helpful to clear that errant coding from these deeper grids. And then everything else seems to clear and resolve much more easily.
Okay. So that's, it's less of a sensitive topic in a way. It's more common.
Oh, yeah, I find it's quite fundamental. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is such an interesting field. And when you talked earlier about how sentences or some specific words have a specific effect, I've been thinking that just from doing ordinary, I guess, trauma therapy, which I'm now starting to think might be energy psychotherapy, that that my sentences and certain phrases can work like magic. That it's just
Yeah.
thought I had one day. I was like, it's like a magic. I have to say exactly these words, and then something happens in the client.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That I can recognize that. Yeah.
Is that how can you? Okay, I know we have. This is a closing. I want to continue. I'm really happy that you've shared so much that you did. But just for closing, what? How do you think that comes across? That is it. I mean, it's the easy way is to say it's energy, and then that's transforming something, I guess. But then, how would you explain that in these words of there's an information field and you say these words to me as a client and then stuff happens to me? How do you explain it?
Well, let me explain it partly by mentioning the experiments of William Tiller, who was an emeritus professor of materials science at Stanford University. And following his retirement for many, many years, he conducted careful experiments with himself and a group of meditators. And they did this extraordinary thing of, in a meditative state, they would use their mind, their intention, formulated in a succinct and clear form of words, to place that intention into an electrical circuit in a plastic box. I haven't got one next to me. I sometimes have. It's just a little plastic box with some simple electrical circuit in it that doesn't do anything very obvious. It just runs a bit of electricity. And this electrical circuit would somehow capture the imprinted intention. It would be called an intention imprinted device. And the intention might be to have some measurable physical effect on like a biological enzyme process or the pH of a solution. And that plastic box could be sent thousands of miles away to a laboratory setting and plugged in, and it would have the intended effect. And it would also have other strange effects. It would create what he called a conditioned space, where the laws of physics would subtly change in ways difficult to describe very briefly, but it would have definite physical effects. So a calm meditative state of mind, coherent thoughts expressed in coherent sentences have an effect. And I think that's it. That's the kind of thing that we are using in the Blue Diamond and in other forms of energy work as well that make use of coherent statements of intention.
Wow, okay, coherent intentions. Okay. Yeah, and I remember what you were saying about that something can lie underneath and you want to have trauma therapy or psychotherapy before that this is going to help. The thing about where you don't, what did you call it? The objectifying part of us. Did you say something about that? Right? Or did you?
I'm not quite sure.
No, I'm using the words, but it was something that there's a part of us who can, a conscious part of us who will objectify to this, object to this. And so.
Yes, our unconscious mind may
our unconscious mind. So
contain objections.
Yeah. So sometimes we need therapy before that this can work, right? Like we need to be congruent like that before that it's going to work.
Yes, we need to identify the internal objections identify them, put them into words, and often it's just a bit of tapping on this acupoint here. It's the small intestine meridian here. Putting the objection into words, even though I feel it is not safe, blah, blah, I accept myself anyway. That will often clear it. But particularly if we also explore the roots and origins of the objection. Why does it feel not safe to resolve this problem? And I'd say tap here and just speak of whatever comes to mind. And pretty soon, within a few seconds usually, the person will be telling me exactly why they feel it's not safe, often much to their surprise, or why they feel they do not deserve to overcome this problem. And so putting it into words and tapping here seems to enable the person's mind-body energy system to update, to revise its assumptions.
Okay, because I was just thinking that maybe one would need a deeper psychotherapeutic process before this work, but you're saying no, that's actually, it sounds like a quick way here to get there.
Yes. My aim always, particularly, or even more so when there's been a lot of severe trauma, is to keep it as light as possible, as light and easy. We don't want the client to get sucked into the old trauma, because often traumas have been so severe that it's simply not possible to work them through by consciously processing them, because they are too severe. It would always be toxic for the psyche. And any attempt to do so would just leave the client in a worse state.
Okay, yeah, great. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So even though it's not meant to just be some quick fix. It's actually because it's keeping it lighter so that you don't re-traumatize someone and you don't get stuck in having maybe that negative self-image as well. And okay, so actually that would be enough to be congruent, like you say, being on your own side.
Yes, being on your own side. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Easy than the other word. Sometimes my words is, I'm sure I'm saying one thing, and then I'm like, oh, I said objectify. That's a little bit different than objecting. Yeah. Okay, but thank you for understanding me. And sometimes energy helps that as well, right? We can feel each other behind the words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so do you have anything you want to close with? Because I'm having a hard time saying goodbye to you.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, Mannah, so thank you very much for facilitating that. It occurs to me to say that the most important point that I've made is about the sacred, unknown, evolving self.
Right. Okay, so people want to underline that.
Yeah.
Circle that. Okay, the sacred, evolving self. Do you call it that?
Sacred, unknown, evolving self.
Unknown evolving self. Okay, so just one comment, because I've totally forgot about your astrology, but you have a lot of Taurus. You're a Taurus, and you have it in the 12th house, and that is surely the unknown place in our birth chart. It gives you that openness, even though Taurus is not. I mean, it's not in itself open, right? It could be quite resistant to change, but because you have it in the 12th house, it makes sense that you have met energy psychology, and there would be some openness to it, because Taurus is about energy. It is about how you vibe and all the harmonies and how they create pleasure and feeling good inside, and landing in your own worth like that.
Oh, well, that's very interesting, Mannah. Thank you for that insight.
Still astrology drops there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Phil Mollon, for entertaining us. And I'll be sure to check out your new book when that's coming too. I'm linking to the one we spoke about, and hopefully I'll get to meet you again.
Thank you very much, Mannah.
Thank you.